Goodness, okay. And is the problem more noticeable in states that did endure those longer lockdowns, like Victoria, for example?
Surprisingly, it's not. It seems to be a problem everywhere. Queensland, which had very few lockdowns, has the same, attendance problem as Victoria, where kids were out of school for almost 2 years on and off. The issue, I think, is that schools are really struggling to deal with this, and it's an issue where we just can't afford to have a sink or swim attitude to education. And I think education departments are going to have to cater to these children because they have a right to education, the same as every other child, and we need to lure them back to school. I think sometimes there's such a punitive approach. I've heard cases where children are given detentions when they've been away and they have to do the detention before they're allowed back in class, and that is certainly no way to try to get an overwhelmed or anxious child back at school. An interesting issue I've heard is that children who are diagnosed with autism are really struggling to go back to class because they've become so accustomed to the quiet of being home, and they have this sensory overload when they're back into classrooms. Teachers themselves are very tired and stressed and overwhelmed, and it's going to be an interesting year. Hopefully we can get back to some normality, but I think we need to recognise that a lot of children have just missing from the system. Over the last 5 years or so, the standard for school attendance is about 75%. So that means that 25% or 1 in 4 kids are missing 10% of their lessons, which is what education departments say is a concerning level of absence. Now, like last year, when we were supposedly out of lockdowns, the attendance levels fell to 50%. So half the children in school, which is 2 million kids, missed 1 in 10 school days. That is a real concern.
And when we look at the demographics here, are there certain age groups in particular that are of most concern? Are we seeing the problem more acute among First Nations students?
Look, it seems to be more acute in high schools. We don't have any data on year 11 and 12 because in those years it's legal to not attend school, so it isn't sort of measured in a public way. Certainly I think high school is the biggest problem, but I've spoken to principals who've said in primary school they're getting more kids not wanting to go to school. I've spoken to a mother, she's a lawyer, and she's tearing her hair out because her 6-year-old, she was 6, she's now 9, has not gone to school for 3 years because she's very gifted and she's doing year 12 level work, but she also has autism, and so it becomes very disruptive when she's bored and she just doesn't fit. And this child is really missing out on an education.
Gosh, anyone who's a parent would understand just how stressful that sort of scenario would be. And it sounds like it is having a worrying impact more broadly on families, with parents divorcing, having to leave their jobs as a result.
Yes, I've spoken to some clinics that deal with this issue who are saying that the stress of trying to get especially teenagers to school, and the arguments every morning and every evening, and the pleading and the worrying is putting a huge strain on parents. Now, particularly single parents, they need to work in this time when we've got rising costs of living. They can't throw in their job to stay home all day with the child, so they end up going to work. The child is left sort of unattended. Parents often argue. It's causing huge conflict between parents because they might have different attitudes to dealing with it. And parents are losing their jobs or quitting work, and I've been told that it sometimes even leads to divorce, which is very sad. And one thing I've read from the Queensland Catholic Education Commission, which is very sad, is that some children are staying home because there's domestic violence and they don't want to leave the victim parent alone. Now, this is a societal problem. It's not just a problem for the school system.
Absolutely. And more broadly for the kids that are actually attending school, have we seen the data show that the fears we all had during the pandemic about the results in terms of literacy and numeracy rates declining, has that played out? Is the data now pretty clear that we have seen a significant drop as a result of kids not being able to go to school for all that time?
Well, the only real data that we have public is the NAPLAN data, which is an annual literacy and numeracy test. It sort of tests the basics, and that shows a great deal of resilience. So that's good, but we don't know, of course, what's happening at a level with other subjects. And a lot of mental health groups are very concerned that students are just so anxious and overwhelmed about schoolwork. I think what schools need to do is to stop trying to funnel every child into an academic pathway, because, you know, when I went to school, it was very common to leave at the end of year 10 and do a trade. So it's very promising that the federal and state and territory governments are now having fee-free TAFE, and hopefully we can get a lot of kids into those other fields which are just as valuable as a career that requires university. I think that we put so much pressure on teenagers these days, and people do not understand the mental health pressures they're facing, particularly with social media and bullying. Bullying is a huge issue. Kids, you know, they're bullied even when they're at home, you know, kids sending nasty messages, etc. And it's easy for adults to rationalise this and say, you know, grow a thick skin, but we're dealing with children, and developmentally they need to be with their friends, they need to play, they need to relax, they need to be creative. And I just think that sometimes you might get a kid who's really artistic, but they fall over because they have to write a long exam about artists, and that's not really their core strength. So I really think we need to be more flexible and ensure that all these children get a really good chance to start out in life.